Hello and welcome to Introduction to AWS. In continuation of our AWS Cloud Computing series, today we are looking at Introduction to AWS, and our objective of today is to equip you with the fundamentals of AWS at the introduction level. Now, starting with AWS brief history, it was launched internally in 2002. Then it progressed to where the vision for infrastructure was developed in 2003. Then Amazon SQS launches publicly in 2004. Then it relaunched with SQS EC2 and S3 in 2006. Then S3 was launched in Europe in 2007. Then Amazon.com Retail migrated to AWS in 2010. And then today is we are in 2025. So from 2010 to 2025, there has been this massive progressive increase in resources and services that Amazon AWS services have been able to offer to customers. So since that 2010, there have been a progressive growth as far as AWS is concerned. Then in the global stage, when we talk about the global public cloud, we are talking about revenue that is over $250 billion annually, and it's growing double digit year by year. So on this global stage, we have AWS being the market leader in global cloud space with over 30% market share. So that also, which has also, they are also the most extensive global footprint of any public cloud provider, making sure at the global level, each and everyone has access to what they offer. And then in the Gartner's Magic Quadrant, we have Amazon Web Service also as a leader. So what is the reason for this extensive global presence? That is minimal latency and performance, and then high availability, of which we are going to look at that as we continue. Then we are going to look at three global infrastructure as far as this series is concerned. We have the AWS regions, we have the AWS availability zones, and the AWS edge locations. So for the regions actually contain physical locations where data centers are clustered. So in that physical locations, they are divided into multiple availability zones. So every region has multiple availability zones with physical locations where data centers are clustered. And then at the moment, we have 33 launched AWS regions globally that are active. Then we have many AWS services are region based. So as we progress, we'll look at the difference between the services that are region and global. And then there's a naming format. So depending on which one is closer to you. So it can be US West Oregon or US West 2. That is how the format are being named, depending on the context of a particular region. Now we have the region, we have the availability zones. So one or more discrete data within an AWS region. So in the AWS region, we have availability zones, and then in the availability zones, we have discrete data centers. And then these data centers have redundant power, networking, and connectivity. In case there's a power outage, there's a power backup to avoid disruption of services. They also have redundant power. That is where redundant power comes on. There's a backup for that in case of power outage. And then networking, it makes sure it have a lot of routers, switches, and servers to make sure there's low latency, as we have looked at previously, and also there's high availability. There's also a very high performance. That is because of this redundant power, network, and connectivity. Then we have low latency fiber, which connect the availability zones within a region. So where there's region and availability zones within a region, this low latency fiber makes sure the availability zones are connected, where synchronous replication is needed, where they communicate with each other in case a particular data center fails. Another data center will be able to pick up immediately. So this low latency fiber makes sure they communicate as in a very, very few seconds to make sure there's a connection and there's a response immediately. And then we have a naming structure. So we talked about the regions being named as US Oregon. So in this case, if a region is named as US West 2 and it has maybe an availability zone in that region, the availability zone will still carry the name of the region, but at this point it will add a letter A to it. In case there are two availability region zones in a region, it will now be US West 2B, US West 2C, according to as much as the availability zones are in a particular region. So that is how the naming convention is, by a letter identifier to differentiate the different availability zones in a region. We have the hierarchy. So in AWS, we say we have the region. I think in United States, in Africa, we have in Cape Town. So all of them are regions. So in that region, there's availability zones. We talk about why they have to have a lot of availability zone, for the sake of making sure every customer experiences low latency and high availability. So in every region, there's availability zone. And then in that availability zone, we have data centers. So this is how the AWS hierarchy works. And then we have the edge locations. These edge locations are actually strategically placed across the regions also, but it's closer to the user, which is a step also to make sure there is low latency and high availability. So it is a bridge between the AWS region and the user, and is closer to the user, and is being optimized for speed access, speed content delivery. So at the edge locations, you find the Amazon Cloud Front, which catch content at the edge locations for lower latency. Instead of maybe a particular content being accessed right from the region, it caches it at that edge location, which is closer to the user, so that the user or the customer can be able to access it immediately with low latency rate. Then we have the Amazon Route 53, which is a domain name service used to connect and route user requests to AWS infrastructure. We have the AWS Shield at the protection level for distributed denial of service. We have the AWS WAF, which is the web application firewall, which protects web applications against SQL injection. Then we have the AWS Firewall Manager, which is centrally configure and manage firewall rules across all applications. So this is all AWS at the introduction level. Thank you very much. Feel free to drop comments and then subscribe. Thank you. See you in the next video as we continue on this series of AWS.